Welcome to Law and Life with Judge Bill Brandt. Today we're going to be discussing some practical legal advice that could be useful to young people. Hello, Judge Bill.
Hello, Kayla. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you?
Just great.
Great. Well, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm happy to do that. First thing I want to say is thank you for working this problem, and thank you to the team that you've assembled. They're all great young people, and I appreciate them. Some of my background, I'm 70 years old. I was born in Dallas. I went to Grapevine High School. After that, I was lucky enough to go to the United States Air Force Academy. There's my ring. And
Awesome.
and graduated in 1977. All the pictures that you see at the end of the wall over there are my class reunions from the Academy class of 77, and that's very meaningful to me. My senior summer at the Academy, I was home on leave, and I met the beautiful blonde-headed woman that we've been married now for 47, going on 48 years this fall.
Wow.
We have 3 children and 11 grandchildren, which is pretty cool. And after I graduated, I got to go to pilot training. I flew F-4s, and if you look closely, you can see the lapel pin. It's an F-15. And then after I got off active duty, I stayed in the reserves. But my civilian jobs were, I worked for Texas Instruments as a systems engineer for a few years, and then I went to Federal Express as ended up being a captain at FedEx. And I retired from FedEx in 2018 after 28 years. Back to the Air Force, I had a bunch of different jobs in the Air Force Reserve, staff jobs, and I also was in the Pentagon on 9/11. And subsequent to that, I had 2 command tours, one in Pakistan, commanding U.S. forces in Pakistan in 2003. And then after that, I went to Iraq in 2004, commanding both really just base command type jobs. The Air Force calls them Air Expeditionary Groups. So I had 600 people in Pakistan and about 1,000 in Iraq. And those were both very satisfying jobs. It's no better thing, except maybe being a lieutenant and flying the F-4. But anyway, I felt after I retired from the Air Force Reserve that I had something else to contribute, and I determined that I should go to law school. And so I was admitted into the Texas A&M Law School in 2013, which was the first year that A&M bought the law school that summer. I was actually admitted to Wesleyan, and then A&M bought it.
Wow.
And I graduated from Texas A&M Law School in 2016. So, gig 'em.
Gig 'em!
And I passed the bar that year, and also was asked that year to run for this office. And for those of you all don't know what a justice of peace does, we may explore that in a later video. But geographically, most of my jurisdiction is in the northeast part of Tarrant County. So we can get more detailed about that later. But it's a wonderful job. I believe I'm exactly in the right place. I believe I'm exactly where God wants me to be.
Amen.
I believe in the Bible. I'm a Christian, and I think the Bible's clear that God raises up governments and he puts them down. So I'm going to trust in him that he's put me in this place, and I'm just going to do my job in the best way that I can. And then the chips will fall where they may. And if he decides to put me somewhere else, not in this job, then that's what he'll do.
Amazing. So I'm actually Kayla Hernandez. I'm Judge Bill Brandt's intern. And so I've gotten the opportunity to meet him and do a little bit of life with him. And so it's awesome to hear your story and see you in the courtroom, because everything you're saying, I feel like translates into how you make decisions. So that's awesome. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, Kayla. The whole question of being a justice of the peace is it's a pretty low level court. We have a lot of what we call pro se defendants or pro se litigants. People who don't have a lawyer, and they don't know the law. And the clerks get them to fill out get them to do some of the paperwork, and then it ends up in front of me, and we try and figure out, what is this really about? Is there a real cause of action? Because you can't sue people for being bald. You can't sue people for having a big mustache.
You guys would be surprised.
There are some
stuff.
There are some lawsuits that are perhaps shouldn't have been filed, but we try and align them into some reasonable cause of action, and we try and get them to mediate if that's possible, as you've noted, and then we end up, if we have to make a decision, then we'll make a decision and tell them they can appeal it if they want to, and go forward. But the beauty of the process is it shouldn't cost them a lot of money, and they can get to an answer, and I'll explain the answer to them.
Yes.
And that way maybe we can get closure.
Absolutely. Awesome. So could you tell me why, you've felt led to kind of do a podcast? I know we were talking one day in your office, but I feel like there's a deeper underline.
Here's the thing. I'm a really good explainer. I tell people that, since I spent 58 years of my life not an attorney, and then 3 years in law school, and I've only been an attorney for 9 years, be 9 years this fall. Okay. Wow. So I understand the world and I understand the law. So I can translate back and forth. Wow. I can explain a cause of action. I can explain, what statute of limitations mean. I can explain, to people maybe why they're a little bit wrong or a lot wrong. And, and they don't have to like that, and they don't have to like me. That's okay. But then I explain to them that they have a right to appeal.
Yeah.
And so that's the best I can do. But as I translate that going forward, I told you that I have 11 grandkids. And we, I'm going to make a personal statement, but it's kind of maybe a general statement, but everybody else will have to make that decision. I feel like we owe our country to our children. Yeah. We're bequeathing this gift that we got. I didn't make the United States of America.
Yeah.
I didn't fight in any of the wars up until, the last 40 years. And I didn't, I was a good citizen. I voted, I paid my taxes, tried to, obey the law and not violate people's rights and raise my kids to do that. But I didn't make the country. The country was given to me.
Wow.
So we've got to make it a little better. There's always improvements to be made, and I'm not averse to improving something. But if the young people don't understand the country and don't understand the law and don't understand how that might impact their life and maybe, how they should grow up, then maybe I'm a good explainer for a reason. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Because I believe that everybody has a purpose, and sometimes we don't know what our purpose is, and that's what being young's all about, is trying to figure that out. But even as you get older, your purpose may change, and you may have another purpose. 20 years ago, I wasn't going to be a judge, right?
Yeah.
So, in fact, my law school, when you're in law school, you typically have a study group. And I had 3 buddies in my study group, and we became very close. And when I ran for and won the office of judge, we had lunch one day, and I said, "Can you guys believe I'm a judge?" And they all laughed at me and said, "Bill, we knew you were going to be a judge from the first day of school because you're just that guy." And so I went, well, then maybe I'm in the right place. Maybe this is part of what I'm supposed to do that I didn't know, but the Lord knows. And
Amen.
so it may be that part of my job as an explainer is to explain things to young people about things that I know about life and about the law. And when you started, when we started talking about this, and you made some comments about you should write a book, you should do this, and then we said, well, why don't we do a podcast? And you said, great idea. And then I said, we'll make it happen. And so you did. And so I think it's working out perfect.
I do as well. Let's go over the overview of the topics we want to discuss.
Well, some of the things that I think would be very useful. A lot of young people get an apartment. I think they don't understand what leases are. I think they don't understand the consequence of a lease, the consequence of perhaps a failure to follow the terms of the lease. And so I'm going to lay those out and give some advice about entering a lease, who you enter a lease with, and what to do when you need to break it or the landlord wants you to move out or something like that. We're going to talk about that in some detail. So leases. On a bigger topic, we're going to talk about property. And property is, some people think that, property is theft or, people owning property isn't a thing. It's all nature's or everything is everybody's. But the reality is that people create property by their work. And so the people who created a car up in Detroit or wheresoever, I think they build some cars in Tennessee and North Carolina, but I don't know about that. They build some in Mexico. But anyway, wherever they're building it, they're being paid a wage. Okay, so their part of the truck is paid to them in wages. And the people who own the factory, they make a certain amount of money. And the people who own the car company, they make a certain amount of money. So when I go to buy a car, I'm paying for all of that so that I can own the car. Now, maybe I don't actually own the car. I have a right to the car as long as I make payments to General Motors Acceptance Corporation or Ford Finance or whomsoever I got the loan with.
Absolutely.
But all of that money was started by somebody doing some work or taking some risk or investing their money or doing something. So they have a piece of that thing. And it's created by the accumulation of those acts. And so people actually have a right to their property. And you have a right to your property, and I have a right to my property. And when you're a young person, it looks like these old people have all the money. And part of the reason for that is, my personal story, I started working when I was 12 years old. And I've had a job every day of my life except about 14 days in June of '73 when I quit my job, and me and 3 of my buddies went on a fishing trip before I went to the Air Force Academy.
Wow.
I've had a job every day of my life except those 14 days. And those jobs paid me in money because I gave them my time or my energy or my intellect or something. And so I own that money. That money's part of me, right?
Yep.
You can't take that away from me and tell me, well, I didn't really harm you. It's just money, right? So I want young people to understand, we'll go into more detail about that, but I want them to understand that property is you. Your property is you, and somebody else's property is them. And so we need to take it seriously. And then we want to talk about owning property with other people. And there's several ways to do that, but we'll get into detail on that because there's a lot of pitfalls about that. And then I want to talk about legal dangers of cohabitation.
Yeah.
And I'm an old guy. I was 20 once. I was a young man with the normal desires of other young men, and by the grace of God, I'm never fell into a big trap. But there are many young men who are afraid of marriage, but they're not afraid of having some woman carrying a baby that has their DNA, and they're going to pay for that for the next 20 years. If she elects to do that.
Absolutely.
So, and that doesn't sound like a property issue, but it's dangers of cohabitation.
Yeah.
And there's some property dangers of cohabitation too. We'll talk about all those. So we're going to go into that, and then as things come along, there will be some life advice, and that life advice is really just practicality. I told you I'm a Christian man, and I can explain that. I'm not telling you that you should be a Christian. I'm not telling you that you should be a member of any particular sect or religious preference, but I'm saying that the fundamentals of Christianity are a very good basis for living free. Because the biggest thing that young people need to do is they need to understand freedom and the purpose for which they have freedom. Because you have freedom so that you can fulfill your purpose, right?
Absolutely.
That's the reason you have freedom. You don't have freedom so that you can abuse your body or pursue a purpose that is improper. Everyone has their purpose, and they need to pursue that purpose, and they need freedom and liberty of conscience to do that.
Absolutely. And coming from Gen Z and my generation, I think these are very relevant topics because we see statistic-wise, people are not getting married.
Right.
And they're afraid. They get into cohabitation situations. They own homes. And then there's a lot of legal error in that because there's no contract. And a lot of the times I've seen in breach of contracts protect us. And so something I love that Judge had mentioned is the notion of continuity. So when we get married and we get into these contracts, they're not always a bad thing. Can you kind of...
Well, let's talk about continuity.
Talk about that.
One of the things that people have in life, I'm going to say old-fashioned people. My wife's grandparents owned a dairy farm in Illinois.
Wow.
It passed down to their son, and he's passed it down to one of his nephews. So the Hellman Farm in Hamel, Illinois, has been in existence for over 100 years. And that doesn't mean everybody has to be a farmer in Hamel, Illinois, because then we wouldn't have Texas, and that would be a tragedy. But we do have to, it is very useful to have a continuity of your life. And a lot of people move, and a lot of people's parental situation is chaotic, and that's an interference with continuity. But the healthiest people have a continuity of life such that they can have a relationship with their parents and with their friends and with their family that endures over the lifetimes of everyone concerned. And it's not always perfect. People are not perfect. People are fallen. And I tell people in court sometimes because they want to tell me that the landlord's a bad person or the tenant's a bad person. Yes. And I tell everybody, I always agree with them. I say, you're right. I believe you're right. The problem is that everybody in this courtroom's a bad person. The judge is a bad person. The bailiff's a bad person. And all the people in the gallery are bad people because we're flawed. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. It's a fundamental Christian text. And so does that mean we have license to go out and be evil? No, because Jesus redeemed us. And so we have kind of a duty to go out and reflect him and stifle that evil as best we can and pray for help doing it because it's going to be hard to do it on our own.
Absolutely.
But the continuity comes when you, kind of back to the Christian thing, if you have a relationship with someone and if you mess something up and then you just blow them off because you can't face them and say, I messed up, I'm sorry. If you do that, you're going to have a life full of these little disjointed relationships that go on for as long as they go, and then they break, and then they're dead and gone, and then you go on to the next one. Okay, well, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
You're going to end up running through everybody you know, and you're going to be alone. Similarly, contracts are continuity,
Yeah.
right? And
It's insane that it does that.
And if you have a cell phone provider and you've done a good job paying for your cell phone and they renew it and you pay and you pay and you pay and you finally get to the end of the contract, you can say, hey, I'm going to switch to whatever. And when you switch, they will check up on you and they will go, oh, they were a good fulfiller of their contract, so we can give them a contract too. So that continuity has benefits,
Absolutely.
right? And continuity, your credit score is actually a measure of continuity.
Wow.
Right?
It affects every aspect of your life.
Yeah, because you have fulfilled your word multiple times for amounts of money that might be very great. And if you do that long enough, you'll have great credit and you can pay a smaller interest rate on the house or on the car or whatever it is you're doing.
Absolutely.
So
I love that. Very, very important for today's time. Do you want to
Okay.
talk a little bit about leases?
Well, let's talk about leases. Typically, there's some standard leases in Texas. In the apartment world, there's the Texas Apartment Association, and they have a standard lease. In the residential, in a neighborhood home, it's the Texas Real Estate Commission lease. And these leases all have stuff in them. There are multiple paragraphs, pages of these leases, but I'm going to go over about 5 things, okay?
Okay.
The first one is, who's going to sign the lease? And this touches on owning or being in a contract with someone with multiple people. Let's say, Kayla, you're the landlord, okay? Or let's say you represent the landlord. The landlord is XYZ Apartment Company Incorporated or whatever, okay? And you're Kayla representing the landlord. So you can sign on behalf of the landlord, okay? Me, I'm going to I'm entering an apartment contract with my buddies Luke and Ryan, okay? And we're all buddies. I trust them. We've been going to school together for we were in grade school together, and we just graduated from high school. And, one of them's got a job and the other one's going to go to school. And I'm kind of figuring out what I want to do. And, I got a little money from my grandmother. She left me a big pot of money for my graduation. So we get into a lease together. So who's going to sign the lease? Is it me and me and Luke and Ryan, or is it just going to be me, or is it just going to be Luke, or is it just going to be Ryan? Who's it going to be? And the answer is, doesn't matter, as long as it's not you.
Oh, wow.
Because if your name's on the lease, it doesn't matter if their names are on the lease. Because when things go wrong and Ryan loses his job and Luke decides he wants to go to college somewhere else and there's no money to pay, my money from my grandmother ran out. When they sue me, if I signed the lease, I'm on the hook for the whole lease.
Wow.
It's called joint and several liability. So if we all sign the lease, they can sue whoever they want, and they will go after the easiest one to get money from, which is probably the one with a job or with or that they can find. Okay? So be careful who you enter into a lease with you on the lease.
Yeah.
If somebody invites you to go live at their apartment for nothing, I mean, I guess you can do that. You're not moving your future forward, but it won't actively hurt you.
Yeah.
But if you got 3 buddies and they're going to sign a lease and they want you to sign the lease with them, you're betting on their character. And many 18-year-olds have pretty good character, but it's never been tested, right?
Yep.
Never been tested. Can we take a little detour and talk about character?
Please.
Okay. You may know that when you write the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, we call those individual letters characters of the alphabet, right? Why do we use the same word for the character that, is your integrity, your guts, your heart, whatever integrity is, whatever character is? Why do we use the same word character for letters? Why is that?
I'm not sure. Explain it to me.
Okay. Well, there is the act of writing characters in olden times when they were when they were carving them into stone. That word engrave and character are related words. To engrave something is to give it a character.
Wow.
And your character is engraved upon you. Okay? And that engravement takes time and some pain and work. It's character is a form of virtue, right?
Yes.
It means you'll do what you say you'll do. You'll carry out the mission that you were assigned. You will perform it, okay? And that's pretty easy not to do. I mean, it's pretty easy to go, I think I'm going to the mall. I think I'm going to go play video games, right? But the more you do the thing you're supposed to do, you're engraving that character on your own heart and soul.
Wow.
So when you're 18, it hasn't been engraved that much. Your character isn't perhaps as strong as it might be. That's not to say that it won't get better. And it's not to say you can't make an error, a serious error, and recover. But it's better not to make the error. And it's better to understand things. So when you're entering a lease with your 3 high school buddies who are all good guys, you know, we played football together, or you were all in some club together, or you just like to go to each other's house and play video games, you may not have seen their character. You may not have seen their true character. And so I'm just saying, be careful. Be careful.
With that being said, how would you protect yourself going into, let's say, Luke and Ryan want to get into a apartment or rent a house together, and they are a little skeptical, okay, about going into that. How could they protect themselves?
Well, let's say that Luke actually had a decent job. Well, what Luke can do is tell the landlord that he wants to be on the lease, but he wants to be able to sublet the house to, he'll let the landlord give them a disapproval. Like if the landlord said, you can't sublease to Bill, but you can sublease to Ryan. Okay. So Luke could release the house and sublease one of the bedrooms and common areas to Ryan, as long as Ryan paid this much money on the first of the month, every month. And if he didn't pay, I can't remember who I made the landlord. Ryan's now the landlord, right? Ryan's on the lease, but Luke is a subtenant.
Okay, yeah.
Then Ryan can evict Luke.
Okay.
And Luke's not out. Luke's not paying. Luke's not on the hook. Luke is on the hook for the full amount. Okay, but he has a way to get Ryan out and get a new tenant in to help with it. And of course, the other thing, young people often live paycheck to paycheck. You've got to have a pad. You've got to have enough of a pad that when you evict Luke, you can cover yourself that month because he didn't pay.
Margin, yeah.
You know what I mean? You've got to be able to stand that. If you can't, then you get a cheaper apartment and don't have a roommate.
Yeah. Let's kind of go down a little bit of a rabbit hole. How, when you were in your 20s, you were married, you had children, right?
Well,
so how did you have that margin? Because it's hard nowadays.
It's very hard. I will tell you this. When I was 18, I had been working since I was 12, and I had to go. I was going to be out of the house one way or the other because you're 18. Good luck.
Wow.
Don't let screen door hit you in the rear on the way out.
Oh, wow.
And so there's another story here that we won't go into, but I was lucky enough to get in the Air Force Academy. And the Air Force Academy, you're in a dorm. That's paid for.
Yeah.
You're going to class. That's paid for. You've got to pay for your clothes, but they give you I want to say we were getting something reminds me it was $300 a month. And they took stuff out of that so that you got about 60 or 70. But it was still, as long as you didn't flunk out, you're invulnerable.
Yeah.
Do what they tell you and be where you're supposed to be, and you're going to be all right. When I was commissioned a second lieutenant in 1977, I got married in October, but you got to be a pretty good screw up to get kicked out of the Air Force as a lieutenant or company grade officer. So I had the security of that. My big leap of financial faith was when I got off active duty, and I put my papers in. You had to put them in 6 months ahead of time, and I didn't have a job, but I had 3 little kids. And so when you don't have a job and you got 3 little kids, you're pretty motivated. And but I was lucky enough to get the job with Texas Instruments. In hindsight, it would have been better to go straight to FedEx, but my daughter had a health problem, and I didn't want to be away.
Yeah.
So, but that all resolved, and it all worked out.
So what I'm hearing from Judge Brandt is get a job, okay?
Well,
First step.
There are serious academic research studies that say if you graduate from high school, are employed, and don't have a child before you're married, you will end up in the middle class.
Okay.
It's America.
Yeah.
This is the land of opportunity. I'm a Republican, and it's pretty obvious. It's pretty obvious who I voted for. But America should be a high wage country where we need people. We need people, and the young people are the people we need. So get skills. If you don't have skills, don't mortgage your future to get the skills. Work, my daughter and I were talking the other night. If you go buy cornbread and beans, and you have to learn to make the cornbread, but the beans are in a bag. You can live on cornbread and beans for a long time, working all the time.
Yeah.
Once you've done that, you've got a little pad of money. Then you can not work part of the time and go get a skill that will pay. And there are lots of skills.
I know Judge Brandt, so I want to bring this up, but you should talk about your grandson. So he didn't go the academic route, but he learned a skill.
I have 11 grandchildren. My oldest one is Levi William Brandt. He's the first one on the board there. And he just turned 23 last month. He's been with Classic Chevrolet for 3 years. He's a mechanic there. Started out as a lube tech. They really like him. And I said, "What are you doing that they really like, Levi?" And he said, "Well, I'm not on my phone." So that's a big deal. Show up, be there. And he said, "When I don't have a car, I go help the technician in the bay next to me." And they love that because he wants to work, and he's going to do very well for himself.
Yeah,
and very proud of him.
I wanted to bring up Levi because not everyone is called to academics, and that's okay. And I think the culture in the society, and we see it on Instagram, we see it on Facebook, and we think that's the standard.
Well, here's what I want to tell people.
Yeah.
You have a wonderful academic degree, and you're really smart, and man, I'm really proud of you for being so smart. Go flip on that light switch. And when the lights come on, tell me how they work. And when the lights don't come on, tell me how you're going to fix it.
Yeah.
When you go to the restroom and you use the facilities, and then you flush the toilet and it doesn't flush, tell me how you're going to solve that problem. Because you need somebody that can actually solve the problem.
Absolutely.
There's a famous saying that I'm going to mangle, but plumbers have cured more diseases than any doctor. So if you think I'm going to go to med school and save the world, well, why? You could be a plumber and save the world.
Absolutely.
Right?
Well, I say all that, and I agree with you, because I feel like academia is becoming oversaturated in America.
It is.
And that's why we're having a lot of immigrants, and I love immigrants. I'm a third generation. My family's from Mexico, third gen
Right.
been in America. So I'm not opposed to immigrants, but I feel like they're taking the jobs that no one want to do.
Well,
And because Americans don't want to do the job.
we've got to figure out what we want.
Yeah.
We can have, you can have somebody take care of your baby who's doesn't speak English. You can have somebody do all your yard work that doesn't speak English. You can have somebody who do the AC work at your house and they speak a little English.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can have a country where we all speak English and we all work.
Yeah.
And I'm here to tell you, let's talk about work for a minute.
Yeah,
work,
please.
because we know the Bible story from the Garden of Eden, right? If you don't know this story, it's in Genesis 2. I can't remember, or 3.
Beginning.
Anyway, and if you go into it, it's man sinned. I'll tell a joke about that later. Do you know what? I'll tell it now. Do you know what the first recorded excuse was? This is the avoidance of responsibility. The first recorded excuse in history was, Adam, why are you eating that apple? Well, she gave me the apple, right? That's the first recorded excuse.
Blame it on the women.
And it didn't work then, and they never work. Don't make excuses. Take responsibility.
Yeah.
But work was what God pushed Adam out of the garden. You can't be in the garden. Well, he did that as a blessing. First of all, leaving the garden means you won't be immortal. He didn't want them to be immortal in their sin. He wanted them to be mortal so that their sin could not, so that they didn't have to live in their sin forever.
Wow.
Okay? And then he said, what do people do if I give them, with this sin, now they've got this sin in them from the original sin, what do people do if they have leisure? They generate problems. Idle hands are the devil's workshop.
Yep.
Fyodor Dostoevsky said, if all of the problems of humanity were solved and men had nothing left to do but eat cakes and go about the procreation of the species, someone would break something just to see what happened. We can't stand perfection, and we can't stand too much idleness, okay? We're supposed to be abstain from terrible things on Sunday and reflect on our gifts and God's mercy. But mostly we need to work.
Yeah.
And the more people work, it's what's that other expression? It's funny, the harder I work, the luckier I get. You know what I mean?
No,
and it's absolutely true.
Yeah.
Absolutely true. So,
Absolutely.
so I'm a big proponent of people working. People need to work. And I'm not telling mothers to go outside the home and work. What I'm telling people is engage in the area that you're supposed to engage in.
Absolutely.
And you're likely to be okay.
I agree. Yeah, a lot of, I don't want to generalize Gen Z, but I think we struggle with this because we don't want to be a plumber. We don't want to be a gas station worker. You know, we want to work in where everyone could see us and have Ferraris and Lamborghinis. But I think we miss that. Like, that's okay to have that dream, but we have to start from somewhere. We have to,
Right.
You know, David, he killed the lions and the bears, right? And then he went after Goliath, and he was a shepherd. And so I feel like we miss that season of having to be humble.
Well, you may have heard the expression, Kayla, don't sweat the small stuff. Have you ever heard this?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, well, here's what I'm going to tell everyone. Everything is small. Everything is small. There are no big things. There are an accumulation of small things that look like a big thing. Okay?
Absolutely.
And so if you want to be successful in America, sweat the small stuff. And of course, it helps to be on the right track. You want to be focused in a path that's going to get you there. But do the details. The details matter. And if you do them, you'll probably be rewarded with more challenges. There's a Bible story about that, the talents.
Yeah.
Okay, who
Very
is
good.
faithful in little will be faithful in much. So leases, you want to make sure who signs the lease can handle the whole thing on his own. If
Okay.
you're if you're a member of 2 or 3 people and you can't handle the entire lease on your own, I'd do it different if I were you.
Okay.
Do something different. Number 2, your lease, typically the lease is due on the first of the month without demand. There's some language in there that says a late penalty applies on the 3rd or 4th day. Many people take that to mean that the payment is actually late on the 3rd or 4th day. That is not the case. That's just referring to the legal obligation for the late penalty. You're actually, the lease is due on the 1st without demand, so you got to pay on the 1st, not later than. Okay. There's a section in the lease called prohibited conduct. Read it. It's going to involve stuff like don't do dope. It's going to involve stuff like don't be loud.
Yeah.
Don't disturb your neighbors. Don't curse at your neighbors. Okay. And then the last thing I'm going to tell you is if you're getting evicted, if you get a notice to vacate from the landlord, okay, you haven't paid your rent or you violated something in the lease and engaged in prohibited conduct, you can fight it in court, but landlords typically don't give those notices just for the fun of it. They decided that you didn't pay and they have records. Or you engaged in prohibited conduct and they have the police report. They have the other thing. So if you get a notice to vacate and you want to avoid having a judgment against you on your record, because it is in the county records, you will vacate within the notice. So you get a 3-day notice to vacate, vacate. Get your stuff and get out. And resolve not to fail again in that way. Because if you do that, they can't file a lawsuit against you. When you vacate, you return the key. Hello, Kayla. I got your notice to vacate. Here's my key. The apartment's clean. I'm ready to do a walkthrough whenever you want to. Here it is. And then when Kayla takes your key, you have vacated the apartment. Okay? Don't leave the key in the apartment and just leave. Don't throw the key in the trash and just leave. Give the key back to the landlord and tell them you vacated and ask for a move-out inspection. Okay? Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Then you don't have the judgment on you because here's what happens. This is the last thing I'm going to say.
No. Yes.
I mean, last thing I'm going to say
Yeah.
on leases that is noteworthy. Every month or couple of weeks, we get an email or someone comes to the counter and they go, we're closing on our new home this Friday, and we've got this. The title company won't close the loan because I have this judgment about this eviction from 2015. And I go, we're sure sorry. You've got to get a release of judgment from the landlord. Oh, we can't find him because they sold it. And we don't. And it's a big nightmare.
Oh, wow.
So, general advice, if you ever have a judgment against you as a young person or a middle-aged person, figure it out and pay it off and get a release of judgment. Then when your fortunes turn and you've fixed your life a little bit and you've met the beautiful woman and you're both got good jobs or whatever and you're going to buy the new house, you can actually buy it instead of at the last minute going, well, we found this judgment from Tarrant County Justice of the Peace Precinct 3 and you can't close because you've got an outstanding judgment. So that's important. Avoid that.
Oh, wow. That is really good to know. So until you pay that off, it'll follow you?
It's going to follow you.
Oh, wow.
Now, judgments can go dormant after a certain period of time.
Okay.
But most title companies, they don't like that. They don't like having a dormant judgment because judgments can be revived. Well, it's legal mumbo jumbo, and we don't need to worry about that. But the bottom line is, pay your debts.
Absolutely.
And a judgment debt is a debt. And most judgment debts have interest rate.
Oh, wow.
And right now, I think the interest rate's 7.5% per year, which doesn't sound like much, but if you go 10 years, you've doubled your debt.
Accumulates.
Yeah.
So be careful of who you get an apartment with.
Right.
Yes. So when it comes to leases, be careful who you get an apartment with, right? Who your roommates are. And if you don't entirely trust them because they're 18, 19 years old and you have a good job, you could sublease, correct?
Sublease them. Now,
Okay.
you have to have the landlord's approval
Landlord's
to do
approval.
that.
Okay.
And then follow the lease, read the prohibited conduct. If you get a notice to vacate, vacate.
Okay.
And if you ever have a judgment against you, deal with it.
Okay. Don't put it off.
Don't put it off.
Because it can bite you in the tail
What you
later
can
on.
what you can do, this is what I encourage people to do. Figure out what 2 years payments would be to get it paid off with the interest, and just start making those payments. And on the check, write judgment debt from, and then put the docket number for the case on it, and carry the first one into the office and say, this is for my judgment debt on this case. I'm going to be making payments. And then do your best to pay it every month, get it paid off, and then you've got a clean record. And when you pay the last one, you take that one in and say, I believe this squares us for the judgment debt with respect to this. Go get the form from the Justice of the Peace Court or wherever your judgment's from that is a release of judgment, and then give that to them and say, would you please fill this out and sign it? Okay, and if they say yes, then check with the court a week later, and if they still haven't done it, you can squawk to the court and maybe we'll have a hearing.
Absolutely. Great. Well, thank you, Judge Bill Brandt. This was an amazing first podcast. I loved getting to know your origin story and hearing what you're passionate about. And then let's talk a little bit about what we're going to discuss next week, more about property law.
Okay, well, we're going to talk about property law in general and the possible negative effects of cohabitation in property. We're going to talk about credit cards a little bit. We're going to talk about owning pets. It sounds so silly.
Yeah,
but
it's not, though.
Some of my horrible cases are boyfriend and girlfriend suing over the ownership of a pet. They're no longer boyfriend and girlfriend.
Or fiance,
fiance,
we saw that one. It was
significant
like my
other,
first week at
blah,
the
blah,
court.
blah.
Yeah.
So anyway, we're going to talk about those things and other topics as they arise. But I hope everyone will tune in again.
Yes.
I'm very excited to do this, and we're actually looking forward to any legal type questions that you get. At the end of the podcast, in the notes, there'll be a place you can send questions or comments. If they're comments, you can catch more flies with honey than you can with vinegar. So I don't want to hear about any comments about my poor haircut or Kayla's great haircut. But if you've got something constructive to say, I'd sure like to hear it. And I hope y'all have a wonderful rest of your day. Kayla, are we done?
We're done. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Awesome.
All right. Bye.